callers with a B. Those are all drivers in personal cars in 90 cities around the U.S., but Uber's plan is to get rid of the driver. They've recently dumped a bunch of money and forged a pact with Carnegie Mellon University, one of the leaders in vehicle automation, trying to figure out how to get rid of the driver. That's what they're trying to get to. This little image on the side is my youngest grandchild, my grandson Jude. He loves this little car, but it's just a little too small for him. So he has removed the dashboard and the steering wheel so that he can slide into this car. That's a driverless vehicle. No steering wheel. That's where he's going. That's where we're going. So let's talk a little bit first about autonomous vehicles. You're all familiar with autonomous vehicles, probably because of what you hear from and about Google, mostly about Google, not from Google. They're fairly quiet in a lot of respects. Google has been working on autonomous cars for a number of years. This is a Lexus RX 450 or something like that. They've got about 25 or 26 vehicles now testing out on the highways. It's mostly been in California, but now they've got a few. They've just announced a couple weeks ago they're sending some to Austin, Texas. The system that runs here is called Google Chauffeur, and it drives the vehicle. It uses LiDAR, which most of you I think are familiar with, on the roof, light-emitting, detecting radar of some sort that is mapping in real time everything around it, 360 degrees, augmenting the onboard map that it has. It's got cameras, which are digital cameras, GPS, radar sensors, a variety of things around the vehicle so that it can see what's going on around it all of the time. Google has now driven 1.7 million miles in their autonomous vehicles without a driver. Now, usually there's someone in the driver's seat, and in fact, in California state law, I think that's required. And usually there's an engineer in the other seat making sure everything is going well. So when you buy a driver's car, it comes with an engineer sitting in the back seat. 1.7 million miles essentially represents how much you would drive if you drove for 75 years. So if you're still driving when you're 95 years old or 90 years old, that's about how many miles you would drive. So it sounds like a lot of miles, but in respect of sort of real driving conditions, it's not that far. They've had 14 crashes. You get the number 12, you get the number 14. They're a little funny about reporting those numbers. 8 of those were rear-end crashes when the driverless vehicle was stopped and somebody smashed into them. 2 of them were side swipes where a person hit them, and a couple of other things like that. One of them, I think, was the Google car itself when it was being driven by a human. None of those crashes involved the car driving itself. So since 75% of crashes today are the result of human error, that's what they're trying to do, is take the driver out of it. They have encountered in those 1.7 million miles, 200,000 stop signs, 600,000 traffic lights, and 180 million other vehicles. So they're trying to expand their knowledge. They're trying to figure out what their artificial intelligence does and doesn't do, and kind of move that forward. There are a couple of factors driving this. Of course, for Google, it's sort of the novelty that's driving it, but safety and reduced energy use are the real drivers behind this technology. But there are a number of issues that are keeping it from becoming mainstream yet. The studies demonstrate that the top 3 are key: security, reliability, and liability. And then there are other issues with artificial intelligence, how it works. Here's a couple of examples. The car is programmed to obey the law. And in fact, California, there are 4 states that allow driverless vehicles on their roads for testing: California, Nevada, Florida, one other. Can't remember which it is. Michigan, maybe? I'm not sure. Maybe. And California law says the car will obey the law. So when the speed limit is 25, the car goes 25. And you and I, well, do we all, once in a while, you, not me, might exceed the speed limit, but you might have a need to exceed the speed limit, right? You're going to pass somebody. You're accelerating. You're doing whatever you're doing. You might exceed the speed limit. The Google car won't. Bosch, which is a major supplier to the OEMs of equipment for vehicles, recently drove an automated vehicle across the country, California to New York, last spring. 2,300 miles, whatever that is. 95% of the time it was driverless. They were on the freeway, and they were obeying the law all the time. So they made a lot of people mad. And what they noticed, there were a couple things they noticed, and I'll talk about those. One of the things they noticed is as people would pass them, there were a lot of obscene gestures coming out the window because they're obeying the law. And then people, as they were flipping in the bird driving by, they'd look and go, oh my crap, there's no driver. And then they would slow down and watch the car, which was causing other kinds of problems. So that becomes a challenge. Here's another interesting one. This is an image taken in Google car testing, and we're driving down a small suburban road. You'll notice the double yellow line down the middle of the road, and our Google car here is behind this Honda. The Honda isn't moving. It pulled over to the side of the road. The guy got out. He's sitting in the park reading a book. He's going to be there for a while. Well, the Google car can't break the law. It won't cross the double yellow. It sat there for an hour because it can't get around. So we have to deal with the software programmers, and do we trust them to? The software programmers have to figure out how to program it as to when to break the law. And the legislatures have to figure out how to allow that. Interesting problem. Bill Ford, the chairman of Ford Motor, said recently, by the time we get to autonomous vehicles, it won't be that big of a deal. Now, we think this is a big deal. Someday, 2020, I think, is the target date. Google's going to put one of these vehicles, and this is what the latest Google vehicle sort of looks like. They call it the clown car. They started with the ground up. Cars have been designed around drivers. So Google said to its engineers, if the car has no driver, what should the car be? What should it look like? So they've designed a car with no pedals, no steering wheel. It still kind of looks like a Volkswagen, right? But and they've got a slightly newer version of that, but that's what they're driving around. And we think that's a big deal. 2020, you'll go to the Google store, and I don't know where the Google store is, you'll go buy one of those. Now, currently, the LiDAR system is worth about $70,000, and the rest of the technology, including that, adds up to $150,000. So that's probably a $200,000 VW Bug. But you'll go buy one of those, I won't. And that'll be a big deal. But what Bill Ford is talking about is the first paradigm shift here. There are two kinds of technology. There's incremental technology, where we take what we do and what we know and just improve it, one incremental step at a time. And then there's disruptive technology. And there's a lot of discussion today in the literature about disruptive technology. Somebody comes out with, the iPad, something we didn't know we needed, we didn't know we wanted, and all of a sudden we all have to have. Disruptive, a whole new concept. That's where Google is. Google is doing this disruptively. But everybody else, and we think Google's the only one in this market, and we sort of think Apple's in the market, but they're being really, really quiet. Everybody else is in this market. Ford, GM, Volvo, BMW, Toyota, Nissan, they're all in this market. But what are they doing? They're doing it incrementally, one little step at a time. So a recent study indicated who the OEM leaders are in this market. Daimler, which is Mercedes-Benz, right? Audi, BMW, and General Motors are the top 4 leaders in this incremental market. It doesn't list Google because it's not a traditional automaker, so it's not part of this study. And the next tier, the next 4 are similar companies, Toyota, Nissan, Ford. And so there's significant work going on in this market. And if you go out and buy a new car off the lot today from one of these major OEMs, you can buy automated features. A car that'll parallel park itself, a car that'll maintain a distance, right, on the freeway and keep you from crashing into the car in front of you. Adaptive cruise control, they call it. Collision warnings, those kinds of things are available today on cars you buy. That's the incremental technology. Now, BMW, who's one of these leaders, has an interesting problem. They're the ultimate driving machine. So they want to be driverless. How are they going to sell that concept? So there's some interesting things happening here in this market. Now, this is kind of a boring little chart, but I bring it up to talk about this incremental concept. Most of us, certainly me, but probably most of you, today drive in what we call level 0. It's not on the chart. Automated level 0, meaning there is nothing automated about your vehicle, right? It's not doing anything by itself. Everything it does, you are in control of. But automation level 1, it means that there's something on the car that's automated, either in its forward motion or its sideways motion, but not both. So you've got adaptive cruise control, keeping you from crashing into the car in front of you. That's an automated feature, level 1. But you don't have lane keeping assistance. If you might have lane keeping assistance, which is keeping you in the lane, but not the forward collision thing. So that's level 1. Level 2 is having both of those. The car is automated enough to help control you in the forward direction and in the sideways direction. Automated level 3 takes you another step farther, where you can actually sit back and let the car have a significant amount of control while you read a book or text, and there's another legal issue we have to deal with. But you intervene when needed. The step from level 3 to level 4 is very significant, because now the driver is being taken significantly, not entirely, but significantly out of the loop. Automated level 5 is the total driverless vehicle, where the car will pull up in front of your house and your kid will get in the car and it'll drive the kid to kindergarten, right? Something that a lot of people are not very comfortable with in concept. So I bring this up because 2 weeks ago, Tesla introduced a level 2 automation feature in their cars. They call it Autopilot 7. Anybody driven a Tesla? I have a neighbor down the street with more money than he knows what to do with. He bought a Tesla, and he loves it, and he let me drive it about a month and a half ago. It is an incredible machine. It's well built, it's solid, it's smooth, the battery is under the seat, and so the center of gravity is very low. It has a trunk in the back and a trunk in the front, because there's nothing in what we traditionally call the engine compartment. I got it up, you can't tell anybody this, I got it up to about 50 miles an hour on Highway 89 in Davis County one morning when there was nobody there. And he looked at me and said, "Punch it." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Punch it." I said, "You sure?" And he goes, "Yeah, there's nobody around." So I punched it. The first thing, when you accelerate your automobile, there's a little bit of a lag, and then it kind of jerks into shape, and then you feel it shift. This car does not do that. So I punched it. The first thing that happened is it pushed me back in my seat. The second thing that happened, almost instantly, I looked down, I was doing 105. And it didn't feel like it. It was just like that. Well, they just introduced Autopilot 7, which does level 2 automation. It manages your lane, it decides when to change lanes, and it does speed limit management, keeping you in sync with the traffic in front of you and behind you so you don't have a collision. It's a very interesting technology. This is their new SUV they just introduced about a month ago. It's got regular doors on the front, gull-wing doors on the back, sort of like the DeLorean, right? Base model, about $96,000 for those of you in the market. Tricked out model, $145,000. I don't have one. There's a waiting list to get one, a long waiting list to get one. So they call this version 7 a public beta, which is just a little bit scary. Elon Musk said, "We want people to be careful at first. Each driver will be an expert trainer. We don't really want them to take the hands off the wheel while they do this." Okay, great. That's fun. Watch out for these. It can't yet handle stop signs or traffic lights. It's really a freeway feature, but it's an interesting feature, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. So here's the next paradigm that's really not about connected and automated vehicles, but it's a paradigm that's impacting us, and that is this gasoline power versus electric motivation system, right? So we're all familiar, and some of you may own hybrids or fully electric cars. The battery technology is increasing. The Tesla has about a 280-mile range. There are plug-in. There's now systems for inductive charging This is a little image here of a bus, a shuttle bus at the University of Utah. It's run by UTA. It's a battery-powered bus. It charges by driving over, and simplistically, electric plates in the road, and it charges inductively without ever plugging in. So Tesla is planning to build those along the freeways off to the side of the road. You can pull in and charge, and it's solar-powered, so it's free. Interesting. So this whole concept of electric engines, and with better battery technology, better range, and better power, 105 is fast enough for most of us, I think, is changing what we do and what we are and how we move. Let me shift gears now from automated to connected vehicles. This is a whole different paradigm here. The connected vehicle concept is vehicles have a device on board to communicate with other vehicles and communicate with the infrastructure, potentially communicating with you and I as pedestrians or transit riders. Now, you have to be careful. The marketplace talks about connected vehicles, and if you can read some literature that says by 2017, 80% of the vehicles in the U.S. will be connected. What it means by that is this kind of connectivity. Downloading your favorite movie while you're driving, hotspot in your car, music, navigation, all coming into your car through wireless technology. And all the automakers are obviously working on this. Some of you may have a car that does this sort of thing. It's communication technology. So that's one of the paradigms of connected vehicle technology. It's not the one we're talking about necessarily, but it's part of the system. Interestingly, automobiles today are very technologically and electronically focused. Some text at the bottom of the screen that I didn't get pushed into this slide. If you buy an automobile today, it's estimated that 30% of the cost of the automobile is electronics. And 90% of the innovations in the automobiles today is electronics. There are hundreds of computer chips. There are millions of lines of code driving things like your braking, your steering wheel, your exhaust systems, your fuel efficiency, navigation, all of this kind of stuff. The car is the third fastest growing connected device. As we move towards the Internet of Things, not only is your house connected, your city connected, your office connected, your phone connected, your car's connected. So in our paradigm, here's what connected vehicle talks about. You've got the vehicle here, and the vehicle has on board a communications device. NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, will mandate, they haven't finished their rulemaking, but will mandate in about 2020 that every new car for use in the United States coming off the assembly line will have this communication device on board. It's 5.9 gigahertz short-range radio, has a range of about a half of a mile, 3/4 of a mile. And the concept here is this little 5.9 gigahertz device on the car will transmit out from the car every 1/10 of a second what we call the basic safety message. Here's how large I am. Here's my direction, here's my speed, here's my acceleration, deceleration condition, here's what my brakes are doing, here's what my windshield wipers are doing, and several other things. No personal information, no VIN, no make and model, no owner, none of that stuff. Just here's how big of a vehicle I am, and here's where I'm headed, okay? Every 1/10 of a second. So other cars around you know what you're doing, and your car knows what those cars are doing. That information can be picked up on the side of the road with infrastructure that we will build, giving us the ability to know those kinds of things. So when there's a crash, the computer will know it in 2/10 of a second because it will see the dynamics of the vehicle suddenly stopping. It will notice that, there's GPS involved. It will notice that vehicles have come together, if you will. And there's just all kinds of things we'll know about traffic flow in the operations center because of this connectivity. Here's what the roadside device looks like. This is a DSRC, a 5.9 gigahertz DSRC device with antennas mounted on a traffic pole here. Not very large, not terribly expensive. That allows us to communicate, get stuff from the car, and also communicate back to the car. So the vehicle is talking to other vehicles and to the infrastructure, and it's a two-way communications device. So here's the next paradigm shift. Cars are no longer independent. Now that sounds simple, but it's not. We've never had the car depend on anything other than what's in the car. The automakers aren't used to that concept. The drivers aren't used to that concept. The highways aren't used to that concept. So we have this huge paradigm shift of our cars now becoming part of a system. Now, here's the next paradigm that's sort of interesting. We've talked about automated vehicles. Now I'm talking about connected vehicles. Automated vehicles base what they are doing on what they can see with their LiDAR and their sensors. All the decisions they make are based on what they can see. Connected vehicles are basing their decisions, and connected vehicles not intended to be driverless. Connected vehicles intended to give you, the driver, some information. Connected vehicles are basing their information on what they can learn, not what they can see. What they can gather, the information they can gather. You're driving down the freeway, some person 5 cars ahead of you slams on their brakes. You can't see that person. Your car knows that in a tenth of a second. Can tell you something's happening, you need to slow down, right? So it's based on what it can learn. So you got the autonomous vehicle, you got the connected vehicle. The next paradigm shift is what the automakers are doing is building connected automation. For a long time, we saw these as entirely different paradigms. Google has really no intention of playing the connected game. They don't want anybody messing in their vehicle. They don't want any input from the outside. They're autonomous. They're being very autonomous about their autonomy, pun intended. The connected vehicle is being very connected and communicating broadly. Every other automaker is doing both. They're mixing both of those things together. Ford, GM, Volvo, BMW, everybody is doing connected auto. That's the direction. We've got this concept of connected automation. Now, here's the next paradigm, and I'll go back to the Tesla. When Tesla introduced this concept of version 7 of the automated driver, you don't go into the auto shop to get that installed. So what happens is you've got this Tesla, you drive it into the garage at night, this is what my friend does. You drive it in the garage at night, you plug it into the wall, but it also ties into your Wi-Fi. The computers at Tesla connect to your car and go, how's everything going? Car says, well, not bad, but I got this little problem. Tesla goes, well, we'll fix that tonight. And the car gets new software while you're asleep. So what Tesla did was downloaded this version 7 driverless stuff to all the vehicles that were equipped with sensors already in the garage at night. You don't have to take it to the shop. My friend said, I got a problem with the Tesla. I park it at night, I go to my computer, I send him an email, I don't know how this all works, and the next morning the problem's solved for free. Now, this version 7 software, you have to unlock it. So as a driver, you send them $2,500. That's the price tag for this thing. And you unlock it. And this is if your car is a late enough model to have the sensors. So we have this concept now, this paradigm now, where vehicles are not static. They're changing. Well, like your cell phone, you get a new operating system, you get a new whatever, they fix a bug. It just all sort of happens. Interesting. And another paradigm shift is this concept that we, as transportation providers, have always had. We build roads. Automakers build autos. And we don't have to talk to each other, right? They know how wide our lanes are. We know how fast the cars go. Whoops, I jumped ahead. They build, we build. We never communicate with each other. This is a whole new paradigm because now we're communicating with each other. I was in a meeting with some automakers in Washington, D.C. in April, and we had a very interesting conversation with each other about what we thought about the others. And it was clear that we hadn't been talking very much. One of the interesting things, if anybody in the room is into traffic signals and signal engineering, one of the automakers said, you know what, we've got this great idea. We've got some of our engineers who've come up with this concept that we could make your traffic signals communicate with each other and coordinate signal timing down a corridor. Would that be cool? And one of the traffic engineers stood up and said, we've been doing that since like 1970. And what's with you people, right? So there's this big disconnect because we've never had to talk to each other. Well, we now have to talk to each other. So this is a huge shift in paradigm. Let's talk a little bit about connected vehicle and the test beds and deployments, some things that are going on. There are test beds for this connected vehicle infrastructure, vehicles talking to the infrastructure, in about 7 or 8 places. Some of these were built around ITS America annual conferences in places like New York and Florida and Michigan. Some of them are focused on developing particular applications. In the connected vehicle world, there are about 75 different software applications envisioned. Some of them are safety-oriented, preventing crashes. Some of them are environmentally oriented, helping you drive more efficiently. Some of them are information-oriented. Some of them are focused on, let's tell you that there's a sharp curve ahead. Let's tell you there's a low bridge. Let's tell you there's a crash or a work zone. So some of these applications, like the one in Arizona, are built specifically around, let's figure out how to make this application work, build a test bed, and try it out. And so there's a number of these. The feds have one, Turner Fairbanks in Virginia. This one in Michigan is very significant. I'll talk about it a little bit, and the feds have dumped a lot of money into that one. That's this one here. This one is what we call the safety pilot. A number of years ago, the feds said, look, we got to try this technology and see if it really does improve safety. And so they put $40 million, some odd, into this test bed in Ann Arbor, Michigan, in conjunction with the Michigan DOT and the University of Michigan. They've formed this UMTRI, Transportation Research Institute, and they've instrumented a bunch of signals in this area. They've outfitted 3,000 vehicles with this communication device and 73 miles of roadway, and they're trying these systems out. And the conclusion of this study is that with this technology, we can mitigate 81% of all non-impaired crashes. Now, in our drive for zero fatalities, that's big. I'm not sure we'll ever get to zero fatalities without this kind of technology to take the human out of some of these bad decisions we make. 81% of non-impaired crashes can be mitigated, not necessarily totally prevented, mitigated. And so that's what's driving the federal government through NHTSA to make this ruling that all cars will have this technology on board. The Virginia DOT has 2 test beds, one in Northern Virginia near the D.C. area, and another one on a closed track down at Virginia Tech on what they call a smart road, where they do all kinds of road testing. They've done a bunch of work in these 2 areas. This is sort of interesting. This street lighting system is smart. In other words, it detects when there's a car present and turns on. And when the car's gone, it turns off. So kind of an energy-saving deal. I drove through that with some people and saw that go on and off. They can simulate rain and do all kinds of things at that test bed. California has a test bed that they've built in the Palo Alto area with a bunch of DSRC devices along this corridor, and they're testing a variety of systems along there. So there's another test bed. There's also a movement in Contra Costa County, just south of there, to take an old military base, an abandoned military base, and turn it into a closed area test bed, calling it the Gomentum Station. So there have been a fair number of test beds. Now, test beds are exactly that. You try something out. When you're done, you're kind of done. The federal government, about 2 years ago, said, look, it's time that we expand and move beyond test beds to pilot deployments. The concept of a pilot deployment is, let's take some applications, let's put them in live traffic on live streets, and let's see how they work, and let's really assess them. Let's figure out what it takes to make them work, and when we're done, let's leave it and expand it. And so they put out an announcement for a bunch of grant money to do that. About 40 of us applied for that grant money. They've so far awarded grant money to 3 locations. The first one is the New York City DOT, where they will outfit 10,000 vehicles, mostly buses and cabs and city trucks and those kinds of things, driving along these streets of Manhattan and a couple of other corridors to deploy and test some of this technology. The second one is in Tampa, Florida, with the Tampa Hillsborough Express Authority, in some kind of suburban areas in the Tampa area, doing same kinds of things. And the third one is just up the street here in Wyoming, where Wyoming has been given about $6 or $7 million to instrument I-80 through Wyoming, which we all know is a pretty treacherous winter driving experience, with communications technology and devices to detect real-time weather conditions and to warn people of those. The New York City deployment is about 20 million of federal money. The Tampa is about 16 or 17 million. I think this one's about 6, something on that order. Where does Utah fit in all of this? We've been engaged in connected vehicle technology as a sort of a participant in meetings and things for about 12 or 13 years, and we're pretty actively involved in some of those activities now, and we're starting to do some pilot deployments of our own on a small scale. I'll tell you about a couple of things. Here are the states that are involved in some kind of deployment to date. The light blue states, which we're one of, are part of the AASHTO Connected and Automated Vehicle Committee, and have been meeting for years and years. And the triangle states also belong to a connected vehicle pooled fund study, where we fund various deployments around the country, including one in Arizona recently, one in New York recently, to get some of this stuff developed. There are specifically 2 applications that we are currently working on. One of them is called MITS, Multimodal Intelligent Traffic Signal Systems. This is a package of software that was developed in Arizona with funding from the federal government and the pooled fund study in Anthem, Arizona, and I call it sort of smart signal priority, if you will. The concept here is you put this software on a vehicle and in the signal cabinet, and our particular application is with UTA buses. So the UTA bus approaches an intersection and says to the intersection, "I'm UTA bus route number 35. And by saying that, instantly the system knows where that bus should be. And I would like a green light at this intersection at Redwood and 17th South that I'm approaching. And the signal system thinks to itself and goes, okay, bus number 35, I just checked the schedule, you're ahead of schedule. And your counter tells me you've only got 4 people on board. I'm not giving you priority at this signal. Or it says, I just checked the schedule, you're 4 minutes behind schedule, you've got 35 people on board, and 4 of them are trying to catch a connecting bus about 10 blocks south of here. I'm going to see if I'm going to look at what's going on in the signal, looking at what's going on in the intersection, and give you a green light earlier to get you through that. The signal also knows that although the bus is asking for that signal priority, between the point where the bus is and the intersection is a bus stop. So why do I give it a green now if it's going to stop at this bus stop to let 3 people off? So the signal says, great, I can mess with this. I can give you some priority at this intersection. As soon as your doors close at this stop, I'll activate that. So it's a conversation, if you will. It's a smart signal priority system. The goal here is to try to get the buses to be more reliable per their schedule. So UTA generally has about a 93-94% schedule reliability on their bus system in the Salt Lake area. They've picked a couple of corridors, Redwood Road being one of them, where their bus transit priority schedule is about 88% reliable. So what we would like to do with this system is get that reliability higher. And if you're going to ride the bus, you want the bus to be on time. And if we can help that happen, we can improve ridership on the bus. That's the concept. So that's one of the things we're working on. The second one is a weather application. As you well know, I think most of you know, we have a very aggressive meteorological group at the Traffic Operations Center. We've got some really good roadway meteorologists that work for us in the Traffic Operations Center. And in the winter, those guys are in the Traffic Operations Center 24/7. They're there around the clock. And what they do is they're looking at specific road weather conditions around the state all of the time. They're watching the National Weather Service data, they're doing other things, but they also have 100 road weather information stations, RWIS stations we call them, in specific locations around the state, which are giving them very specific weather information. And it's not only just wind speed and precip rates and that kind of thing. There are sensors that are telling them pavement temperature, in some cases subsurface temperature beneath the pavement, all the indicators that help them determine when icing will happen, and all of those sorts of things. So their normal mode is to be able to predict very specifically road weather conditions, and 2 things happen with that data. One, it goes on our website and our app, so you as a driver can log on and go, I'm going I'm going up Parley's Canyon. What does the weather look like on the road? When's the snow going to hit? What's the forecast? And they post 4-hour forecasts on a variety of corridors around the state. Secondly, they have ongoing communications with all of our maintenance sheds. And when there's a lot of weather activity going on, they have daily briefings in the mid-afternoon. People call in. And they say to the shed, okay, so at 2:30 it's going to start to rain, and at 3:15 it's going to turn to snow, and at 4 o'clock it's going to ice. And the guys in the maintenance shed can go, okay, I know what time I've got to get up. I know what time I have to warm the trucks. I know what time I have to have people there. As opposed to sort of taking a wild guess about that, or sitting in the shed all night waiting for it to happen. So it's a matter of helping the sheds be more efficient about what they do and how they do it, and making the road safer for you. Well, that's a long story to get to the point. There are places where we don't have great weather data. And so they make those predictions. And these aren't TV weatherman predictions. Well, you got a 35% chance of rain tomorrow morning. It'll happen at 4 o'clock at this location, right? They're very specific. But we've got places where they don't have great weather data. One of those is US 40, for instance. The National Weather Service radar doesn't cover the area very well. Part of it's fairly remote. They have changing conditions in various parts of US 40. And so the idea here is to put weather instrumentation on trucks. And as the trucks drive the corridor, gather that kind of information in real time, mile by mile, or foot by foot, frankly, along that corridor in real time, and get that data through connected vehicle technology sent back to the weather guys. Now, we wouldn't do this on snowplows because, first of all, they're only out there in kind of the worst of conditions. And where do you put it? If you put a sensor on the front, you're measuring worst case conditions that are going to change in 4 seconds. You put it on the back, you've got best case conditions. So what we would do is put these on private trucking fleets. So in Big Little Cottonwood Canyon, for instance, maybe you would put these on shuttles, airport shuttle systems that are going up and down canyon all the time. US 40, we've talked to a couple of trucking companies in the basin who are moving oil from the Vernal area to Salt Lake around the clock, 7 days a week. Get those trucks instrumented, get that information back to meteorologists, and allow them to have this better data. So that's the second application we're working on. There's some really innovative equipment that can be placed on the trucks or on the vehicles to gather this kind of data. One of them they're working on, they're not quite ready yet, is a little device that you would actually bolt to the wheel. It's powered by momentum, so you need no power for it. It's self-powered. And it measures wheel spin. And it can tell when the road's icy or slippery and tell you that in real time. Now, how cool is that for us to be able to say back to the shed, you've got a 300-foot long icy spot at milepost X right now. Nowhere else, right there. Very interesting data. So that's the story of connected and automated vehicles. It's a set of changing paradigms. It's a very interesting world, and that is our future. That's where we're going. I have absolutely no idea what time it is. I don't know how much time we have left, but those are the things I wanted to talk about. Maybe we can get the lights. 9:16, so we have 9:16. So we have about, wow, we have a lot of time. We have a whole bunch of time. Wow, I should back up. So I don't know if that generates some thoughts, some concerns, some issues, some questions. We have a fair amount of time. I usually go overtime, not short time. Yeah?
As far as security goes, this is all based on Wi-Fi and all that stuff. And so, people where the reliability of the system or people that might want to mess around and stop traffic and things like that, has that been a discussion to try to protect that?
Security, the security issue. That is probably the number one issue that comes up, security. Thanks for bringing that up. There's been an enormous amount of discussion about security from a variety of fronts. You may have noticed in the news about 3 months ago, it was an SUV, it was a Jeep, I think it was a Jeep, that has, I talked about sort of commercial connected vehicle, the systems that are downloading movies and music and whatnot. A couple of guys from Wired magazine hacked their buddy's Jeep through the connected infotainment system, took over controls, and drove him off the road into a ditch. Now, Jeep kind of went, whoops. Now, here's what happened. First of all, Jeep had never really thought about the fact that someone would want to hack your infotainment system. Because who cares about what movie you're watching? You're in the kids in the back, not the driver, right? You're not watching a movie, I hope, while you're driving. And so they had a couple of channels on this system that they just kind of left open. Well, the hackers found them and used those. So we found that problem and they'll plug it. Frankly, in the big picture, there's an enormous conversation going on about security. And it's privacy and security. First of all, I mentioned that these systems don't broadcast anything about you. Now, I can't speak for the infotainment systems. I mean, if Ford makes a deal with Verizon and they're in your automobile, who knows? Verizon knows where you are anyway, right? They know who you're talking to. The NSA is recording your conversations. If you buy on Amazon, they know what you buy. So, we're worried about people knowing where we are. Well, they know where we are. And they're selling that information. So we're kind of beyond that. So I can't speak to exactly all of that. But in the transportation world, we're very concerned about not being able to identify you in any way, shape, or form. We'll cross that bridge, however, when we start saying, let's use this connected system for you to pay a toll. Let's use this connected system for you to buy something online from your car. All those kinds of things we'll have to deal with. What's happening in the connected vehicle world, and strictly in the automated vehicle world, that's not necessarily a problem because it's not accepting anything from the outside. But in the connected automated world, except, I'll deviate. You can now buy a Chinese-made GPS scrambler for about $25. And you can go out and set up and scramble GPS images and make cars think they're someplace different than where they really are. Okay? So there's that problem with automated vehicles. In the connected vehicle world, they've come up with something called the Security Credential Management System. So I mentioned that your automobile will broadcast every 1/10 of a second a data string called the basic safety message, a little set of bits and bytes about these pieces of information. That will have attached to it a security certificate with a long multi-digit number that's unique. And when some other entity receives that message, it goes, oh, here's a message from a vehicle. I can check that security certificate number with my database and demonstrate that it's real. So I know that's an authentic transmission that hasn't been altered. Your car will have a stack of those security certificates loaded onto its system, and that number will change every 5 minutes. So it's a constantly moving security management system that also also prohibits anybody from tracking you. Now, the problem that gives us, frankly, in sort of the transportation world is transportation planners love to do origin destination studies, right? Well, this system means you only study it for 5 minutes. So that's a problem, and we've talked to the automakers about that. So this security management system is being built. Obviously, if you've got these 3 pilot deployments I talked about, these significant pilot deployments in New York, Tampa, and Wyoming, you have to have this security management system in place to be able to run on those systems. And the federal government has had a hard time deciding who should build, own, and operate that security management system. And at one point they said, well, maybe you states should do that. And we went, whoa, wait a minute. That's above us. We don't want to be doing that. And besides, you need this to be interoperable across the continent. So they've currently contracted with an organization called CAMP, the Crash Avoidance Metrics Partnership, which is really a consortium of automakers. It's an automaker group in Detroit where the automakers get together and figure out how to collaborate on crash avoidance systems. And the feds have paid them, I think, $45 million to develop this security credential management system, which will get deployed with these pilot systems. Beyond that, some of the transmissions into the vehicle will be cell-based, not DSRC-based. DSRC is needed for safety applications because of its low latency. If someone puts their brakes on and you need to know that in a split second, that transmission has to get to your car in a split second. Has everybody sent a text and had somebody get it like tomorrow? Right? Cell phones don't have that kind of latency issue, and so we won't use cell phones for those kind of applications, but you might use cell phones for other kinds of connected vehicle applications, like this weather application. We need to send that data to the Traffic Operations Center. It doesn't matter if it gets there in a 1/10 of a second or 5 or 10 minutes, as long as it gets there. So we've got this cell communication system going on, and we talk about security. So the cell companies are always working on those security issues. We're always working on those security issues. It's an enormous thing, and huge numbers of people are working on it, and I don't understand most of it, and we just hope it all works. The reality is everything's hackable, right? And sooner or later, everything gets hacked. And of course, one of the things that the industry does is hires hackers. So the federal DOT, the US DOT just attended, I forget what the name of this event is, the Hacker Conference, about 4 or 5 months ago. They went and set up a booth at the Hacker Conference. And they have little competitions among hackers. And hackers go there to challenge each other and see if they can, hack into the Bank of Moscow, that kind of stuff. And they talk to hackers and say, okay, here's our system. Can you figure out how to hack into it? And we learn from the hackers how to prevent the hackers. So all of that's going on. Long answer to a short question. Security is a huge issue. It's being worked on a number of fronts. We'll solve it mostly. Pete?
One thing I've never heard much conversation around is maintenance. Right now we struggle to take care of everything that we have, but if we've got a loop out or a signal and flash or a camera down, it's a temporary inconvenience, right? In the connected vehicle world, it could be mission critical applications that you just can't afford to lose. How are you going to, how's that going to be handled, do you think?
So there's a question about maintenance. In the ITS world, we have a lot of devices out there, cameras, overhead message signs. If some of those go out, we get them fixed by tomorrow, maybe that's okay. In this kind of a system, everything has to work all the time, both in the automated world and the connected world. That's a huge issue for us. As we tackle connected vehicle infrastructure, we have to put in place mechanisms to be able to not only deploy, but to manage and to maintain that system. You're right, it's got to be up all the time. And that, I think, is probably another paradigm shift for DOTs. And at one level, the states will figure out how to do this. But you've got the other level, and that is you're going to have this infrastructure in cities and counties. And so there's a big there's a big question: who's going to deploy this? How are we going to deploy it? How are we going to pay for the deployment in addition to all the maintenance and management stuff? And the feds have not stepped up and say, we want a national infrastructure, we'll pay for it, like they did with the interstate highway system. And so you're going to start to see states pop up and build it. The feds have built standards. The feds have built an infrastructure architecture that we all can follow to make sure we're interoperable. But we're sort of on this cusp of how do we make sure that we don't all build tolling systems that can't talk to each other? You ever driven across the country and every tolling system is different, except sort of in New England where they've gotten more uniform? We have to not have that problem here. So not only do we have to deal with the maintenance issue, this system will generate enormous amounts of data. In the Michigan test bed, UMTRI, where they've got 3,000 vehicles and 72 miles of road, they generate, I think he told me they generate 1.5 terabytes of data a day. So we have a paradigm shift here where we probably need somebody other than civil engineers working on this system. We need systems engineers. We need software people. We need electrical engineers. We need to diversify our DOT workforce to handle these kinds of systems, to manage it, to get everything coming and going. And we won't save that data. We'll save some of it probably. But the real fact is we have to do stream computing. When that data comes in the pipe, you got to use it and let it go out the pipe. You got to stream compute. So you got to take the humans out of the loop in a lot of this decision making. But this bus priority system, there won't be an engineer sitting there, oh yeah, let's give that bus priority. This is all happening at the signal controller. That data may not even come back to us. It's going to happen at the controller. It may get sent down for other controllers. So that's a huge issue that we have to. That's another paradigm shift for DOTs. We've got to sort of shift our thinking. As we shift our thinking towards operations, which most DOTs are now doing, shifting towards operations, we've got to shift towards this. Yeah.
I mean, most of these systems will eventually not have any physical sensors built into pavements and stuff, right? Even the weather systems
Yeah, I think we'll move away. Yeah, the question is, most of these systems won't have physical sensors built into pavements and infrastructure. We'll move away from that. The sensors will be on the vehicles. So one of the things that a lot of DOTs around the country talk about is, with connected vehicle technology, when do we get to the point where we stop building overhead VMS signs? Because what do we do with those VMS signs? First of all, we spend about $400,000 to put one up, and it has a maintenance issue, and it has a life, right? And then we've got operators sending messages to that. And what you and I mostly see is, now I live in Farmington, so what I mostly see is 13 minutes on Legacy to Farmington, 12 minutes on I-15 to Farmington, right? That's the message I generally see. Well, what if I'm going to Centerville? What if I'm going to Layton? So we've got a useful but fairly stock message meant for a broad variety of people that's not applicable to some portion, to most of those people directly. So what if we could take that data and your car communicated directly with the TOC and said, hey, by the way, I know where this guy's driving me, or I'm driving myself in either case. I know where I'm going because at 5:30 in the evening I go there every day. I'm going here. How long will it take to get there? And let that message show up on your heads-up display or on your Google glasses, or talk to you from the system in the car. So when do we get to the point where that is so specific to you and your vehicle and so ubiquitous in the vehicles that we can stop putting those signs up? And there are DOTs who would like to do that in the next 10 years. That's not going to happen in the next 10 years, I don't think, because we're not going to get enough cars. So let's talk about cars for a second. I keep wandering. Let's say we start to have these DSRC devices on cars in 2020. Which is only a few model years away. Most of us how many of you have a vehicle you're driving that's more than 10 years old? And we're engineers, we're conservative folk, aren't we? It's going to be 12 to 15 years before you buy a car, if you buy a new car, with one of these devices on it. We're 20 years before we have significant penetration of the market so that we can start getting rid of traffic signals, right? Now, Google is talking about having their driverless vehicle on the market in 2020. Tesla says they'll have a fully automated vehicle in 2017. Don't believe anything that Elon Musk says. He's always about 3 years off, right? He's going to get us to Mars, but it might not be on the timetable he tells us, because that's one of his other missions. And I believe he can do it. So this will happen. It's part of the shift, but it's going to be gradual. You had your hand up. Yep. Did I answer that question? Yeah, I think I did. Okay. What are the automakers talking about relative to redundancy? You know what? I don't have an answer to that question. I have no idea. I know they're pretty conservative about what they do. They're also very cost conscious. Right now they're building level 1 and level 2 systems that if they don't work, the driver takes over. I'm not really sure what their thought is longer term for redundancy. That's obviously an important issue that I'm sure they're dealing with. I've just never heard that conversation. Sorry. Bill.
These cars are so smart and traffic can drive closer together. When do we stop widening our arterials and intersections? Because we don't need to anymore.
So that's another question that we get periodically. It's a fairly common question. So if the cars are going to be really smart and automated, they're going to be driving together. One of the problems with congestion, and we've got some congestion experts here, one of the problems with congestion is weaving, right? You get people going, I'm going to get ahead of this guy. And all of a sudden, you got people moving around, people tapping their brakes, and everything backs up and you get this shock wave, and all of a sudden, we're all stuck in traffic. So if we can keep people from doing that and keep everybody in certain lanes and drive them close together, platoon them, and drive them uniformly, then all of a sudden we can get more throughput on the freeway, but also we don't need 14-foot traffic lanes or 12-foot traffic lanes, right? So when do we get rid of that? I think that's a similar question to when we get rid of the VMSs. You've got to get to a point where you have a significant portion of the traffic in autonomous vehicles that are controlled that way. So 2035, maybe? There was an interesting question posed a year and a half ago in San Francisco. There was a group of autonomous vehicle people in a conference like this. And this is the Autonomous Vehicle Conference. It happens every year in July. It was in San Francisco. And these people are around, and these are the people working on autonomous vehicles. The Google guy was there. You know, all the people in this industry were there. And somebody polled the group ahead of time. It had a bunch of data they put up on the screen. When do you think this will happen? When will this feature be there? When will we start doing this? And all kinds of predictions about things. And then they asked an interesting question that I referred to a few minutes ago. What year will it be when you, as an autonomous vehicle expert, are comfortable with a driverless vehicle pulling up in front of your house and having your kindergarten-age child or grandchild get in the car by themselves and the car take them to school? And all of those predictions pushed out about 15 years. Where these people were saying, we're going to have this by 2020 and this by 2025, the prediction for that question was 2035 to never. Interesting, right? So when will we get to the point of sort of eliminating all of that? Well, another thing that came out of this drive across the country where Bosch drove all the way across the U.S. in their driverless vehicle, they came back to us with two things, and we hear these two things, and one more from Google as well. One, to start, our stripes aren't very good. So one of the problems this driverless vehicle had was it can't identify consistently road striping, particularly at on-ramps and off-ramps, and then really particularly when you get off the interstate, right? And in fact, Tesla, when they downloaded their version 7 a week and a half ago, specifically said, we can't count on the paint stripes. This car is making decisions based on GPS. It's ignoring the striping. Second problem they noticed is our signage is not consistent. And so the car was always confused about signage. Now that kind of surprised me. I'm not an MUTCD expert, but I kind of thought we had this standardized. Well, apparently not. But if you think about street labeling, if you think about urban driving, we're very mishmash about our signage, right? And the car got confused. That's the second problem. The third problem that Google keeps bringing up, and they don't want much input, but here's something they want. We do all of this detailed mapping, very micro-detailed mapping, and then one morning at 8:30, you guys close a lane. What they want is real-time lane closure work zone information. Now, as a DOT, don't we want that too? Right? We've struggled with that here in the last 5 years, getting real-time, good, accurate construction information back that we can put on our map about lane closures. So those are the things they're after. So if you can solve some of those problems and get to that point, then maybe you can, and after you get rid of the VMSs, maybe you can narrow the lanes. Now let's talk about platooning. Platooning is an interesting concept, getting a whole bunch of vehicles close together. And the trucking industry is very interested in that. In fact, we're having some ongoing conversations. We've had ongoing conversations for a couple of years with a company out of California called Peloton. And if you're a bicyclist, the word Peloton will mean something to you. I'm not sure exactly what, but it will. It's a word about drafting, right? So they've demonstrated if you take two semi-trucks, truck-trailer combinations, and drive them down the freeway at full speed, 75 miles an hour, 30 feet apart, which is illegal in some states, including Utah. The front truck saves 5 to 7% of its fuel cost. The front truck. The back truck saves 7 to 12% of its fuel cost because of this drafting thing. So we actually went to the legislature and changed the law a year and a half ago to say, we'll allow you to do that in Utah for test purposes with DOT approval. And so we're negotiating with Peloton to do some of that testing here. They've done some in Nevada. They're doing some next month in Texas, and we're trying to get them to do some here. A really interesting concept. So you platoon these trucks really close together. They still have drivers. Although in the military application, the military is doing a bunch of platoon testing in Colorado. The military application is you platoon the trucks not necessarily for fuel savings, but for security. You got a driver in the front truck, or maybe no driver in the front truck, and the rest of them are drones following the truck. So when you're transporting a convoy of fuel across the deserts of Afghanistan, you can do it without risking the lives of all those drivers. That's the concept, right? So the military is very interested in that concept. So let's put that forward into cars. All of our vehicles are automated, and your car knows you're driving from here to Provo, and it goes, well, I'm going to find a platoon that's going to Provo, and you join the platoon. And we configure our system so that instead of an HOV lane, there's a platoon lane. and cars move into the platoon lane away from the exits, because that's always the question we get. Well, I got 15 trucks nose to nose. How am I going to get off on 33rd South, right? Put those guys over in the what was the HOV lane. Let them platoon at a uniform speed, really close together. We just increase throughput and safety. At some point, we get to the point where all the cars, most of the cars, are automated, and so we don't have that lane. They're all over the freeway. But you've always got a guy with a 67 Vet, right? I'm going to drive that baby. I don't care what you say. I'm going to drive that baby. So what do we do with them? Well, maybe they are the HOV lane. All the old cars, get over here. I mean, we have that today, right? You drive down the highway and you see this vintage Model T driving down the highway, and it's got a license plate that says, what's the, historic vehicle or whatever. So we license them specifically, and maybe there's some restrictions on where they drive, I mean, we don't want to restrict the guy from driving the 67 Vet, right? And you go onto the blogosphere and you look at connected vehicle articles, and that's what always shows up. Well, I got this XZ truck, and I'm going to drive that, and I got guns, and you're not taking this, right? We like to drive sometimes, some of us. Some of us like to drive. The ultimate driving machine, the BMW. Why do people buy a BMW? They're amazing to drive, right? So what do we, there's a pair. Maybe you got a car you love to drive, and that's what you're driving on the weekends. But commuting, when you really don't want to drive, you're in the automated vehicle that you don't own. It's a car sharing service. That's what Uber wants you to do. Instead of having 2 cars or 3 cars, which sit idle in the garage or the parking lot 95% of the time, their argument is, do you ever buy a house and only use 5% of it? What's the point in that, right? Why do you buy a car and use 5% of it? So own a car, keep it at your house, use it for trips to visit grandma in the country, but everything else you do, you use Uber, because their argument is, and this isn't necessarily if you're living in Bluffdale necessarily, but if you're living in an urbanized area like these guys in the outskirts of DC, for instance, you're leaving your living room, picking up your briefcase on the way to work. You can either spend 4 minutes going into your garage, opening the garage door, getting in your car, starting it, or you can use 4 minutes pushing a button, walking out in the front curb, and getting in an Uber. Takes the same amount of time. Takes you to work. You don't have to pay for parking. You don't have to find parking. The Uber car drops you off and goes off and does something else. And so that's what they would like you to do, is eliminate your second car or your third car and replace your routine driving with Uber, your urban driving with Uber. And their future, of course, their future, of course, is that that's an automated Uber. So it's going to be half as much money as today's Uber because you're not paying a driver. It's an automated Uber picking you up. And then do we eliminate parking lots downtown? So there's another interesting connected vehicle application that's kind of cool. Urban driving, we spend 30% of our time driving in circles looking for a parking space. That's not very efficient, and it's not very clean, right? So as you're pulling off the freeway on 4th South, your car comes up and says, I know where you're going. There's a parking space on 3rd South and 4th East that's really close to where you're going. I'll reserve that for you. And you drive right there. The automated car will take you right to it. The connected vehicle will tell you, and you take yourself to it. So that's a really easy application. We get, there's a company that owns most of the downtown parking in Salt Lake, right? So we make a deal with them. They write the app. They build this, puts it into your car. Eco-parking concept. Stop some of this urban driving. I'm rambling again. Another question. Yeah?
What about liability considerations as far as if there is an accident that happens, but you had an automated car, self-driving car, some of these things, how are the automobile manufacturers or the federal government addressing liability?
Liability issues. Very interesting topic, very common question. How do we deal with the fact that I just got in a crash and I wasn't driving? Does the other driver sue Google? Yeah, that's what they do. So there's a big conversation about the liability issue. The insurance company is looking at this and saying, okay, on the one hand, we're going to eliminate a lot of crashes, so we're going to cut down on our expense in this liability system. We can lower our premiums. But secondly, maybe we've got to rethink who we're insuring. And Google has stepped up and said, well, yeah, if the crash is caused by our software, we're liable. And a couple of the other OEMs have done the same thing. Yeah, if it's our problem, we're liable. Now, you got to prove that, I suppose, right? But the onboard diagnostics are going to demonstrate exactly what went on. Today, you can your insurance company would like you to get a little dongle that you plug into the OMD port in your, I think that's what it's called, in your car, right? And it records how you drive, and it emails that to State Farm. And then they change your premium up or down, they always say down, based on how you drive. So you've got those systems that could be embedded in the car, and there's no accident investigation because the onboard diagnostics tell the central computer 4 seconds after the crash, well, this stupid idiot ran a red light. They're at fault, and so you know that. But the liability is an interesting question. The whole legal issue is different, is a paradigm shift. You know, as we see new technology come around, it takes the legal system about 8 to 10 years to catch up and figure out how to legislate around and adjudicate around the new technology. And here's an interesting example. Most states now have a law where you can't be actively using your phone while you're driving, right? Distracted driving, you can't be texting. Well, all of a sudden, if part of the time your car's driving itself, why should it be illegal if you're texting? So now we got to look back at those laws and go, well, that made sense in 2014, but it doesn't make sense in 2021. So we've got to sort of follow that trend. And so the liability and legal issues are big. They're being thought through. It will evolve. Things, and you know, for a long time, you're going to have both automated, connected, and non-automated, non-connected vehicles on the road. And we've got to figure out those interactions and all of the issues around those interactions. We've got to figure out licensing issues. That's one of the things that the 4 states have done that have legalized autonomous driving. How do we license them? Nevada was the first one to actually pass a law to license an autonomous vehicle. And the license plate has an infinity symbol on it because it's a vehicle of the future. That's the only way they could figure out how to say that. And the cars are labeled. You know, this is an autonomous vehicle. Well, someday you're going to discriminate against me by putting autonomous vehicle on my car, so I'm going to take that off. But so all of this is going to have to evolve in our licensing issues and our management issues, our legal issues, the whole thing. Another question. Yeah.
Are speed limits, do you see speed limits going up since they are going to be connected and be automated?
So will speed limits go up? Yeah, I suspect we'll see, ultimately, we'll have to see something dealing with variable speed limits where the vehicles will be deciding what safe driving is, maybe, right? So maybe that's the trick around can't break the speed limit, is you vary or get rid of the speed limit altogether. And clearly, if everything's automated, you don't need the signs because the driver's asleep. And the GPS system knows what the speed limit is. So yeah, I mean the whole concept of speed and how you manage that. We're all platooning, and they're going 105. That's an interesting shift. I haven't heard a lot of discussion about that, but clearly we have to go someplace there. So how does the car know what the speed limit is? You know, that's all part of the GPS mapping. So I don't know if you've ever driven in an unfamiliar place with your navigation system, your TomTom, your Garmin, whatever it is. And I've noticed as I've driven across some states, you know, it tells you what the speed limit is. And I'll see a speed limit sign, and I'll notice that right after I pass it, the GPS system knows that. The Garmin knows that. It's all part of their mapping. I don't know whether those mapping companies are gathering, you know, Google drives their vehicle around the road so they can get street view, and they're mapping everything and putting that together. I don't know if they're getting that by physically seeing the signs and embedding that in the map, or if they're getting that data some other indirect way. Yeah, that's a great question. We've got the variable speed limit system in Parley's Canyon, and during the during weather events, that speed limit, and it's a regulatory speed limit, not advisory speed limit, that speed limit can change. How soon does the car know that happens? Well, what Google is telling us sort of indirectly is that not only is the car based on really detailed GPS maps that Google has created, but it's got that LiDAR system mapping in real time everything it sees, right? So they're suggesting to us that that data is getting passed along. So they want to know that there's a lane closure. That's really important to them. But in the next breath, they say, but eventually we have some cars that go past there and see it, and that gets sent to our system, and our map gets updated, and other ones of our cars will know that's there. I don't know how long that takes, because they're not doing the connected vehicle thing, or at least today they're not doing the connected vehicle thing. So they're sending that over the cell system, I assume, back to their headquarters because they're monitoring their cars. I would suspect it's got to have at least a 10-minute lag to do that. Now, if they would jump on board with connected automation, that information could be shared instantly with cars within a half-mile range, right? And most of the other automakers will be doing that, so maybe that's how they get there. That's one of the interesting tricks. Yeah.
What about the non-automobile industries, trains, buses, UTA? Are they moving toward this non-driver?
So what about non-automobiles? How do they fit into this world? Well, there's about 3 answers to that question. The first one is, I mentioned that NHTSA will have a mandate that new vehicles coming off the assembly line in about 2020 will have DSRC devices on board. They have mandated that they will mandate that for light vehicles. So that will not impact heavy vehicles yet. Now, they're working on rulemaking ultimately for heavy vehicles. So we expect to see within 2 years a decision as to whether they will mandate that for heavier vehicles. We suspect they will. It doesn't make sense not to, but they just haven't done that yet. And they might be doing that partially in response to the manufacturing community say, whoa, wait a minute, let us catch up here. Let us do the cars first, and we'll deal with these niche industries with smaller volumes later. So in the connected vehicle world, we think that'll eventually get to other road traveling vehicles. So that'd be buses and trucks and all of that kind of stuff. I don't see any discussion about doing that for trains, although clearly in our example of working with UTA, we could easily put that MITS system on light rail. And bus rapid transit, that's still a bus, but and use that for other kinds of mechanisms. Now another advantage of that MITS system I talked about, I talk about the bus application, but there are other applications for that software. And trucking is one of those. So let's say we put MITS on all of CR England's trucks that are coming out of their warehouse in the west part of the city. And we select a corridor where they generally drive. And it's to everyone's interest to keep those trucks moving and not stopping at stoplights. And we use the MITS system to give trucks a higher priority than other vehicles at certain times of day or under certain kinds of conditions, and move freight traffic down freight corridors. So there's all kinds of applications to that. In the automated world, there's all kinds of work going on in automated. Of course, trains are sort of automated already to some degree, based on some significant crashes they've had in New England in the last 5 to 6 years, the Federal Transit Administration is mandating a system on trains that automatically keeps them below a certain speed on sharp curves, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of sort of angry discussion going on in Washington today because the mandate for that, I think, is 2020, and the freight industry is saying we can't do that. We can't get the technology designed, built, tested, and deployed in time for that deadline. And so their scare tactic is they're saying to Congress and everybody else that'll listen, you know, on that deadline date in 2020, all the trains are just going to shut down because we can't meet the deadline. They're trying to get Congress to change the deadline. So there's a lot of automation going on, a lot of automation discussion going on in the rail industry. There's a lot of automation discussion going on in the trucking industry. This whole concept of truck platooning, truck automation, truck fleets. And if you talk to the trucking companies here, these guys are very sophisticated. They have very advanced onboard systems in their trucks today. GPS and all kinds of other things to meet all kinds of regulatory requirements. They're in tune with that. There's a lot of other things going on in the industry that are sort of advancing. I don't know if I answered the question, but if I didn't, clarify. Yeah.
Curious what the cost might be for a typical user. You know, what you foresee, what the difference would be paying to travel, you know, personal or even commuting then compared to what we're paying now.
So what's the cost differential for travel for some of this technology? I've got a couple of answers to that, I suppose. When I buy these DSRC devices to put in a vehicle and on the roadside device that I showed you hanging on the pole, retail price, I mean, you don't go to Walmart and buy one of these. They're fairly specialized equipment. But I've got a few, and they're about $1,200 a piece. The onboard device that goes in the vehicle that's standalone, it's not embedded in the car. You know, I buy it and put it in a bus and plug in a power source, is about $900. The automakers are telling us that once they start putting these on cars in mass production, that the cost differential for them is probably on the order of $100 to $150. And so one of the sensitivities that the automakers have is if I deploy some kind of technology on my car, it's going to increase the price of my car. I have to be able to sell that to the consumer. So that's one of the reasons they're doing connected infotainment. People will pay an extra $600 to have a Wi-Fi hotspot and download Disney movies for their kids in the back seat in real time. Will they pay $150 for a crash avoidance system? Well, first of all, the automakers don't have a choice because the feds will mandate it. But what they're trying to do is twist that around and try to convince us as consumers that these systems are worthwhile, right? I mean, nobody said, well, you're going to get airbags, and so therefore you're going to pay more. They just put them in because they had to. But as they build incremental technologies into the car, they're marketing those very heavily. So there's a cost to that, but they're trying to keep that in control. As a driver, if you think about shared vehicles, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the folks who argue for vehicle pools, shared vehicles, argue that you can cut your commuting cost by about half by not having to own and maintain a vehicle, and you're sharing that. I know from personal experience that that an Uber cab ride is about 40 to 60% the cost of a regular cab ride. I rode an Uber yesterday. It was $21.48, and people told me the cab ride for the same distance was 60 to 65 without tip. And so the argument there is that the cost for us commuting will go down. Do you not need a garage anymore? Are you not paying parking downtown? All of those kind of things figure in. Now, the cost to society is sort of a different question. There are people who argue that once we get to automated vehicles, vehicle miles traveled on our highways will actually go up, not down. Because let's say you own an automated vehicle. Instead of you driving your car to work and parking it, your car is going to bring you to work and then it's going to go home. Because it's going to park at home, or it's going to park someplace where it's cheap or free, and it's going to then take your kids someplace and take your wife someplace and then come back and get you. And so, and they're also arguing that if we're not being the drivers and we're not hating our commute, now we're more willing to live farther from our work. And so instead of trying to live close so we cut down our commute time, well, I don't care. I'm going to read the paper and have breakfast while the car's driving me to work. I can commute an extra 30 minutes. You know, I can live someplace really nice, way out. And so that could increase VMTs. The models are still up in the air. There's still a lot of debate about that. We don't know what the answer to that is. There's a societal cost, obviously, to that. So I kind of danced around all kinds of issues, but we think ultimately this is better for the consumer, cost-wise. Yep.
The discussion was earlier that car makers and highway builders and designers haven't necessarily talked, and going forward, and we have a 34-year planning horizon. And are there discussions or where say attached to agreement about what's going to happen to language, things of that nature, and how should we be incorporating those into decisions we make today for projects that are out there 30 or 40 years?
So the question is, since the infrastructure owners and the automakers haven't been talking and aren't really communicating, and our planning cycle in transportation is generally 30 to 40 years, what are we doing to start getting those discussions about lane widths and infrastructure into that conversation? Well, first of all, we are starting to talk with the automakers on a regular basis. AASHTO, ITE, and ITS America recently established an institution called the Vehicle to Infrastructure Deployment Coalition, and it includes automakers, and it has a working group within it specifically focused on infrastructure owners, suppliers, consultants, and automakers talking together to start that conversation. There was recently concluded an NCHRP study, a TRB study, looking at the impacts of automated and connected vehicles on state and local transportation agencies, and it identified about 35 things we need to start to figure out, and the first wave of those are starting to be funded. So the conversation right now is happening at a sort of research, think tank, strategy kind of a level, and those will end up creating documents and plans, and we'll all start to absorb that. Carlos says to me, okay, so what does this mean to us? Automated vehicles, what should we do? And at this point, I don't know. 4 states have passed laws allowing automated vehicles to be tested on their open streets. Texas tried to do that, and Google went over and talked them out of it. And I think what's happening is a bunch of states started jumping on the bandwagon, let's pass a law, but nobody really thought about what the law to say. And so Google's worried about 50 different laws really complicating their lives. And I think a lot of us have said, look, let's step back and just watch this settle, watch the dust settle for a year or two. There is an NCHRP study that's been planned to look at the legislative and policy side. What should we be doing as states to respond and prepare for this? So there's a lot of conversation going on about it. I don't think there's any real good answers. We don't know yet. I mean, we don't know yet what the impact on our physical infrastructure is. Will we really narrow the lanes? We think that with better automation, better management of the system, you don't have to add a lane because we'll increase throughput. So we need to start thinking about that in our long-term planning. But the problem is there's really nothing definitive to guide that discussion yet.
I guess along those lines, and we convened before, we've had a couple of projects that we thought, you know what, instead of a 30 or 40 years, maybe we have a 20 years. We didn't get that far more economically. And then 10 years down the road, we'll have the organization make that decision on what we do the next 10 years.
Yeah. You know, there's been a lot of work on I-15 in Salt Lake County recently from a study standpoint, and I think there was another session talking about that. Do we add a lane to I-15 at the south end of the valley to help with that congestion problem? And the DOT, UDOT decided, well, let's not do that. Let's look at other technologies first. And so there's 3 studies actually that have been going on to figure out how to manage that corridor, and can we manage it without adding asphalt? And I think there are some options coming out of that. I think there's some lessons learned from that that can be applied in major corridors in Region 4. We have to look and see, are the problems different? You know, is it truck climbing and truck passing versus volume of traffic and those kinds of things? There's all kinds of discussion about how will technology and operations shape what we build in the future. And as most state DOTs, as I'm hearing from most state DOTs, this is a new topic that's really just sort of starting to get traction. What time is it? 10? I'm behind schedule. Well, I can go on forever, as you can tell. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the session, and enjoy the rest of your day.